Life is one big experiment, is it not? Practically every step taken is on a trial or error basis. And is that not what an experiment is? Trial and error, leading to a proven outcome or at least an acceptable one. There's the petri dish laboratory variety, but there is the blood, sweat, and tears variety too. And my story falls into that category. Our experiment lasted 8 years and 8 days, 11 years if you count from the time before we got married. I met the love of my life in the early 70s, and said in that condensed way, it suggests a slam dunk, but as with every love story, a slam dunk it was not. Through trial and error, we got there, got to the point where we agreed that we could do nicely together. Not only did we like each other a lot, but there was also that essential swooning element too. He taught me about the music and musicians he liked, and I taught him some stuff too. I introduced him, for example, to the idea of deodorant. We adventured together, and I like to think that he gave Donegal to me, the whole county. As a Dubliner, I'd been taken southwest as a kid, never northwest. Donegal was far away, and then there was the border. He, from West Belfast, had it seemed a bed or a place to stay in every corner of the county, and I became smitten. Some of our early passionate happenings happened in Donegal. I lost a single pearl earring on a beach there one moonlit night. We were good together, and neither of us can remember a proposal or a big saying yes moment, but 2 years later, we married. And for the holiday after our wedding, we headed away to the continent on our yellow Vespa 90 scooter with everything we would need for 6 weeks. That is the compressed love story. There's more, much more, but for now, that will suffice. In those early magical days, we dreamed up our future, as you do, where we'd live, how we'd live, the arrival of children, lots of them. They were definitely a cornerstone in our plan. We even had a girl's and a boy's name selected. The stage was set then, and off we headed to Birmingham for the start of our grown up life. He became a full time social work student, and I became the breadwinner. 3 years later, we reversed that arrangement. But change was in the air. The light was changing, is how I recall it. Thatcher came to power, and a dark and oppressive pall settled over everything. While we were not living in the north, it was all of a piece. And as if what was happening at home and in Britain wasn't enough, the sense of threat to the world felt tangible with the escalation of the nuclear arms race. There was talk of cruise missiles being housed on British soil, talk of how to prepare for and survive a nuclear bomb. Raymond Briggs's children's book, When the Wind Blows, was about a nuclear explosion, and for Christ's sake, it was being read to children, and slowly the thought began to emerge and take root that it would be madness to bring a child into all this madness. We couldn't, could we? And then the thought crystallized and transformed itself into a kind of Hobson's choice, and then into our experiment not to have children. We did put our shoulders to the wheel, joining and becoming active members of CND, marching and sitting in and demonstrating and campaigning. It absorbed us. And then there was our work stuff. His first job after qualifying was to run a unit for, and I quote, difficult and disturbed adolescents with live-in accommodation. 16 kids, 8 boys, 8 girls, and living alongside them only served further to cement our decision. Why, we thought, would we bring more children into a world where there were, it seemed, too many already, some like those in our brood at that time without a fair chance. The idea of a child-free future became fixed, so fixed that family and friends either accepted it or struggled with it. My adorable mother-in-law was struggling with it and found a moment of just her and me while we were back in Belfast for a break. She put her hand around my wrist, drawing me towards her, as she still does even now when she has something of import to communicate. Leaning in, she said, parenting is the most wonderful thing. Her soft face pleading with me to cave, to give up this mad idea of, as she saw it, ignoring the church's teaching. The two of you could talk to someone, she continued. I know a modern priest that you could talk to, presumably thinking that a Catholic perspective might sway us to procreate as the dogma taught us. The idea of any priest, even a modern one, persuading us to do the right thing was not a runner. And the pair of heathens that we were returned to England, and like Maggie, we were not for turning. Our life was sweet in a peculiar way. Living with those kids held a particular sweetness, quasi-parents celebrating Christmases and camping holidays, sticking with them on the daily ups and downs of their lives. But our island home began calling us back from England with increasingly strong tugs. And when an opportunity presented itself, we headed back, as fate would have it, to Ballycastle, where he was to run an alternative to custody centre housing 8 boys at a time. Here we were again, with more amazing, resourceful, funny, sad, struggling kids. But after Birmingham, we pinched ourselves. The not yet touristy beauty of that place, whatever direction you looked, was bliss. We were home. We linked up with CND on the North Coast, travelling to spend weekends on sit-ins at the Bishop's Court RAF base, rumoured as a possible site for nuclear weapons. The nuclear threat continued, and a year later, cruise missiles did arrive in Britain, and the Greenham women girded their loins, painted their faces, and abandoned their homes to disrupt. And we felt, if anything, more resolute in our experiment. It's strange though, isn't it, how the winds of change blow? We didn't feel them initially, softly whispering around us. In fact, it took a year or so to say out loud, maybe, just maybe. We had tested the hypothesis, and maybe, just maybe, we could invalidate it. Could we refute it? That was the question. The winds of change altered by the fact that we were home on our island, surrounded by all that is familiar, family, friends, away from the threat of outside. Maybe we could more safely do it here, bring a child into the madness that continued. Maggie had still a few years to run, but maybe we were a little safer nearer home. 1 year later, we caved and decided to throw caution to the wind. Let's see how that blows, we thought. And within a blink of an eye, it seemed, she arrived, 8 years and 8 days after we married. While 7 months pregnant, I recall going to a theatre production of When the Wind Blows. And as I sat in the dark and the nuclear explosion was enacted with thunderous sounds that fairly well depicted the sound of such an explosion, I wrapped my arms tightly around my bump, trying as best I could to protect her from the sound of the very thing that nearly prevented her from joining us on this mad planet. She's 35 now, and her sister is 33. There's another little person too in our extended brood, whose parents didn't flinch at bringing her on board at this time, when if I was young again, I might have faltered. Such is the dire state of the world. I ask, is it more mad and terrible now than it was then? I ask out loud sometimes, and the answer that invariably comes back is that there is always reason in every generation to desist from choosing to have a child, but we're wired as human beings to reproduce, to ensure our survival as a species. Destroying the very, and this when we are destroying the only place we can survive as a species. Experimental time is running out on that one, but hey ho.